In 2012, renowned artist Thomas Kinkade was found dead with gold glitter on his toenails and paint still under his fingernails. Kinkade was the most commercially successful painter of his generation, earning over $100 million a year at his peak. But the man who sold comfort to millions couldn't find any for himself. This is not a coincidence, but a consistent pattern. Creative success is often seen as the ultimate goal, the validation, the freedom from pressure. But the higher you climb, the more the dream tends to look like a trap. The same drive that built something extraordinary can quietly devour the person behind it. Commerce turns self-expression into a product. Audiences turn private pain into entertainment. And obsession, left unchecked, hollows a person out from the inside. That is the part our stories about success almost never mention. We tell a very specific story about creative ambition. The artist grinds through years of obscurity, then breaks through. The musician plays to empty rooms until one song changes everything. The designer gets ignored, keeps going, and eventually builds something undeniable. These stories are everywhere, in films, in podcasts, in the way ambition gets framed as a virtue worth suffering for. And they all end in the same place. The world finally sees you, and the pressure lifts. That is the fantasy. The reality tends to be harsher. In many creative lives, success does not end the suffering that came before it. The pressures multiply. Old wounds don't close. They simply get a bigger audience. The thing that once felt personal and alive starts reshaping itself through markets, patrons, and expectations that were never yours to begin with. And the work keeps moving outward, while the person making it gets pressed into a smaller and smaller space. Kinkade is one of the clearest examples of that process. At the height of his career, he had won by every commercial measure that exists. He trademarked the phrase, "painter of light." He built an enormous national gallery network around paintings of glowing cottage windows, garden paths, and misty rivers, the visual vocabulary of a safe, idealized America. One estimate held that 1 in 20 American homes contained a piece of his work. Then the other side of the story kept surfacing. His company filed for bankruptcy protection in 2010. An arbitration board found it liable for fraud in disclosures to gallery owners, with the award eventually increased to around $2.8 million. When he died, the Santa Clara County medical examiner reported high levels of alcohol and tranquilizers in his system. But the forensic details only capture the end of the story. The deeper erosion had been building for years. From 1984 to 1990, Kinkade had been producing more expressive, impressionist-style work under a different name entirely, Robert Girard, a French-sounding pseudonym chosen because it might resonate with a fine art establishment that consistently dismissed the Kinkade brand as kitschy. The Girard work was more personal, and closer to the kind of painter he seems to have wanted to be. Ultimately, it did not sell the way the cottages did. So he went back. Year after year, back to the paintings the market understood, while the work he actually wanted to make stayed marginal and largely invisible. That gap between the paintings he had to produce and the paintings he cared about was not a minor inconvenience. It was the real cost of his success. What made that story impossible to dismiss as one man's private failure is that its essence is everywhere. The medium changes, the era changes, but the mechanism does not. A person's inner life becomes a product. The audience attaches to the product, and the person gets trapped serving it. But the collapse rarely starts with fame itself. It starts the moment the work has to serve something beyond the person making it. The oldest version of this story is still one of the best. In 1508, Pope Julius II commissioned Michelangelo to paint the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel. Michelangelo did not want the job. He refused more than once. He was a sculptor, had never painted a fresco at any significant scale, and had no interest in doing so. That did not matter very much when the most powerful patron in the Western world applied sufficient pressure. So, he painted. For 4 years, he was forced to work on scaffolding 60 feet high, enduring paint powder that fell constantly into his eyes, while his body contorted into an unnatural shape. In a poem he sent to a friend in 1509, he described it directly. His stomach crushed under his chin, his spine twisted, his face turned into what he called a floor for droppings from the brush above. He wrote that the strain had given him a goiter. And then the line that carries the most weight. I am not in the right place. I am not a painter. One of the most celebrated works in Western art was produced by someone who hated the conditions of its making. In a medium he had not chosen, for a patron he could not refuse. We celebrate the ceiling, but rarely do we consider the cost. The romantic image of the creative person is almost always built around freedom. The lone artist following a pure impulse, insulated from commercial pressure by the seriousness of the work. Rick Rubin has become one of the clearest modern spokesmen for that idea. He has talked extensively about putting the audience last, letting pure creative instinct lead without worrying about what anyone else wants. It is a compelling idea. It also collapses pretty quickly. In one of his accounts of working with Roy Orbison, Rubin describes a moment where Orbison did not want to sing a particular high note at the end of a song. Rubin pushed for it anyway, because without it, he said, it did not feel like a proper Roy Orbison record. That is the audience working through a trusted intermediary. The market did not disappear. It just entered the room in more refined language. That pressure has never really gone away. It has only changed shape. Michelangelo had a pope, Gaudí had wealthy backers, Kinkade had a retail market with fixed expectations. The modern creator has an algorithm, one that does not summon you to Rome or tell you directly what it wants, but communicates through metrics, distribution, and volatility. Post consistently. Stay recognizable. Replicate the version of yourself that worked last time. The form changes, the pressure does not. And the trap it builds is a specific one. The more successful you become, the more the audience knows exactly what they want from you. Success does not widen the space available to a creator, it narrows it. The version of you that sold is the version everyone now expects you to keep being, even as the real person underneath it keeps changing. Over time, commerce narrows what a creator is allowed to be. The moment the work stops belonging fully to its maker, exposure becomes part of the price. In 1992, Thom Yorke wrote Creep. He has described the period behind it as a serious, consuming obsession with a woman he met at university, something that, in his own words, got completely out of hand. The song came from that state of mind. It was humiliating, self-lacerating, and personal. It was not written as a hit. It was written because something inside needed somewhere to go. Then it became a hit. By 1993, Yorke was performing it to arenas full of strangers every night. Journalists kept returning to the wound. What did it feel like to be the creep? He later said, performing it felt like doing a cover of somebody else's work. Something that had once been a private act of emotional processing had become a product, and the product now belonged to the crowd. The audience got to consume a vulnerable moment of Yorke's life and go home. He did not get to set it down when the show was over. Burnham spent years documenting that exact arrangement from the inside. He came out of early YouTube and grew into one of the most technically precise performers of his generation. His show, Make Happy, built toward a moment where he stopped managing the performance and said plainly what was actually happening in the room. I want to please you, but I want to stay true to myself. I want to give you the night out that you deserve, but I want to say what I think and not care what you think about it. A part of me loves you. A part of me hates you. A part of me needs you. A part of me fears you. The audience had been laughing. They went quiet. What they did not know was that he had been having panic attacks on stage during that tour. He was so overprepared that the show could run on autopilot while he was in genuine distress. He later described feeling an axe hanging over his head every night, anticipating the next attack while managing the one already in progress. The audience cheered through it. They experienced vulnerability being offered as content. He later described it as something he was deeply ashamed of, because the stigma of suffering, when success makes that suffering look like privilege, makes it nearly impossible to name directly. He ultimately took a 5-year break from live performance after that tour. When he returned during lockdown in 2021 with Inside, he finally named the transaction out loud. Come and watch the skinny kid with the steadily declining mental health, and laugh as he attempts to give you what he cannot give himself. He was still performing the damage. He had just stopped pretending the arrangement was something else. There is a biological reason this kind of pressure hits creative people with particular force. A 2003 Harvard study led by Shelley Carson found that highly creative achievers are roughly 7 times more likely to show low latent inhibition, a weaker filter for stimuli the brain would normally screen out. The filter stays leaky. More comes through, more associations, more patterns, more noise. That trait supports original thinking. It also means criticism, hostility, and public judgment may land harder and stay louder than they would for someone whose filter closes more completely. The same openness that makes the work possible also makes the person more exposed when the work is made public. The foundation of both creativity and vulnerability turns out to be the same. For Kinkade, commercial success ultimately did not protect him from the psychological weight caused by years of ridicule. He gave the audience exactly what they wanted, but what they wanted was not him. And the distance between those two things, maintained across enough years, will hollow anyone out. So, when that split is sustained for long enough, it stops being just an emotional burden. It starts reshaping the person around the work. Antoni Gaudí spent 40 years of his life on a single project. He took over the Sagrada Familia in Barcelona in 1883 at the age of 31. What began as a commission became the total absorption of his identity. After losing several close friends in the early 1910s, he withdrew from almost everything else. He declined major commissions, refused press interviews, and eventually moved into the unfinished construction site so he could be physically near the work at all hours. His appearance changed dramatically over those later years. The man once known as well-dressed and socially engaged became unkempt and disheveled, wearing fraying clothes and shoes bound in strips of fabric. On June 7, 1926, on the way to his daily confessional, Gaudí was struck by a tram. He was 73. He carried no identification. Bystanders mistook him for a vagrant and initially did not assist him. He was taken to a hospital for the poor. It was only when his friends and employees began searching for him that the city understood what had happened. Its greatest architect had died in the street, unrecognized. He never lived to see the cathedral finished. It remains under construction today, scheduled for completion in the late 2020s, nearly a century after his death. The monument outlasted the man, consuming him long before the tram ever arrived. This is what the third force looks like when it has had enough time to operate. But it does not require 40 years of cathedral building to recognize the pattern. Creative work, at its most serious, asks for obsession, that willingness to care past the point where most people would stop. And creative industries reward that willingness. The most obsessive person frequently gets furthest, so the behavior keeps getting reinforced. The person keeps paying for it long before the damage becomes obvious. The 2024 Looking Glass Report, a mental health survey of over 4,000 workers in the UK film and television industry, found that 30% had experienced thoughts of suicide in the previous year. The national average for that figure is around 5%. 35% described their own mental health as poor or very poor, up from 24% just 2 years earlier. Those figures point to an industry-wide problem, not a handful of exceptional cases. By 2025, analysts valued the global creator economy at around $253 billion. As the industry scales, more people are being drawn into the same psychological structure, perform consistently, maintain a recognizable persona, and manage public judgment in real time, without formal employment protections or institutional support to absorb any of the damage. The algorithm rewards consistency and punishes disappearance. It does not ask whether the person producing the content can continue to produce it. The pressure Michelangelo faced from a pope in 1508 has been democratized. You no longer need a Vatican commission to trap you. You just need a channel, a following, and a posting schedule. The same pressure now reaches people at every level, and that is what makes the whole trap so powerful. Most people do not enter it for fame. They enter it for something much more human. Most creative people are not chasing fame in the way that word usually implies. What drives most of them, beneath the ambition and the push for recognition, is something older and more human. The desire to be understood, to make something that shows how the world feels to them, and have someone look at it and quietly say, "I see it too." At its core, it is about being genuinely recognized by someone, even one person, rather than vaguely acknowledged by millions. The tragedy is that the systems through which creative work gets distributed are not built to provide that kind of recognition. They are built to scale. And at scale, the real person is reduced to whatever version of themselves the audience responded to first. The hit song, the recognizable style, the persona people learn to love. The person underneath keeps changing. The product is expected not to. Kinkade wanted to share other paintings. The market did not respond. Yorke tried to move past creep. The audience brought it back every night. Burnham tried to perform through the anxiety. The performance was cheered. The anxiety stayed. None of them found, at the height of their commercial success, the thing they had probably been looking for when they first started making things. That does not mean ambition itself is the enemy. The problem begins when external validation starts influencing the work so heavily that the creative person is no longer at the center of it. They are simply producing what the system rewards. The philosopher Byung-Chul put the internal version of that arrangement with precise, uncomfortable clarity. Everyone carries a work camp inside, simultaneously prisoner and god. The exploitation is invisible because it does not feel like coercion. It feels like passion, like caring deeply about the work. And that is exactly what makes it so difficult to see when it crosses a line. The most sustainable version of a creative life, the evidence suggests, is not the one optimized for the largest possible audience. It is the one grounded in community, not commerce. Work held by people who actually know you, not just the version of you that sells. People who can see when the obsession is starting to consume you and care enough to actually say something. Without that kind of grounding, success stops enlarging a creative life and starts consuming it. What creative ambition tends to destroy is not talent. It destroys the part of a person who existed before the audience arrived, the private part, the one that made things for the quiet satisfaction of making them before the making became a requirement. Before self-expression became self-exposure, before self-exposure became self-exploitation, and before the exploitation was so thoroughly disguised as success that the trade had already been made before anyone thought to read the terms. The higher you climb inside the system, the harder it becomes to stay a whole person inside it. What the system extracts is precise. It converts inner life into something consumable and rarely reveals the price until you have already agreed to pay it. Understanding that price before the bill arrives is not a reason to stop making things. It is a reason to know what you are actually building toward and for whom, and to make sure at least part of the answer is yourself. If you enjoyed this episode about the dangers of creative success and ambition, you may resonate with this next one as well.